Picture the Middle Ages, drafty stone huts, families shivering by a dying fire, right? Think again. Outside, the air bites like an icy blade, but step through a peasant's low wooden door and a soft wave of warmth greets you. Surprised? These families didn't just endure winter, they engineered comfort. Here's how. Inside, the ceiling sits low enough that you could almost touch the rafters. That tight space matters more than decoration. It traps rising heat the way a lidded pot holds steam. Thick wattle-and-daub walls, woven sticks coated with clay and straw seal against drafts better than bare stone. When the outer clay dried, it formed a dense skin that slowed the escape of warm air. The builders didn't use modern insulation, but they understood that packed earth and lime plaster could hold heat like a heavy quilt. Fuel choice shaped comfort too. Firewood was common but scarce in some regions, so families burned peat bricks cut from wetlands or even dried animal dung. These fuels smoldered slowly, creating steady heat with little flame. A central hearth glowed day and night. Its embers nursed carefully so the next morning's fire caught without effort. Doesn't that sound like an early version of the modern wood stove? Heat also came from simple habits. Animals sometimes shared the main room at night, their breath and bodies adding warmth the way a radiator adds background heat today. People slept in close quarters under layered wool blankets, and many beds were boxed in with curtains that trapped body heat. If you've ever wrapped yourself in a thick sleeping bag, you already know how effective that microclimate can feel. Medieval builders treated the kitchen as more than a cooking space. Positioned at the center of the house, the hearth radiated warmth through adjoining walls and floors. Earthen floors absorbed the heat during the day and released it slowly after dark, a natural thermal battery. In some homes, small vents near the roof let smoke drift upward while still keeping precious warmth inside. Why does this matter for what comes next? Understanding these structural choices shows that survival was never an accident. Each design, low ceilings, clay-filled walls, central hearth was a calculated answer to winter's threat. These people didn't just hope for mild weather. They engineered comfort with the tools and materials they had. So the next time you picture the Middle Ages, forget the image of families shivering beside useless fires. Think instead of compact rooms glowing with steady embers, walls that breathed but didn't leak, and clever routines that turned bitter nights into tolerable ones. In the chapters ahead, we'll step deeper into that world to see how fuel, kitchens, and daily rhythms all work together to keep medieval homes remarkably warm. Picture a frosty dawn in a small medieval hamlet. Before the first rooster call fades, someone in every household is already tending the embers. Without fuel, the home quickly loses the precious warmth gained overnight. Wood, peat, and dung form the three pillars of medieval heating, each with its own story of scarcity and ingenuity. Wood was the first and most obvious choice. Oak, beech, and birch burned hot and smelled pleasant, but forests near large towns thinned fast. By the 12th century, in many parts of Europe, firewood cost more than some families could pay. Villagers often walked miles to gather fallen branches, a cold and heavy chore. Can you imagine hauling a winter's supply on your back through knee-deep snow? When wood grew scarce, peat became essential. Peat is partially decayed plant matter, cut from bogs and dried in bricks. These dark blocks smoldered with a steady heat and little flame, perfect for long nights. Cutting peat was hard, muddy work. Families spent late summer carving neat rectangles from soggy ground. Then drying them under weak Sunday, a single household might stack hundreds of bricks like loaves of bread against a wall. The earthy scent of burning peat drifted across villages each winter, a signal of survival more than comfort. Animal dung, though less romantic, filled the final gap. Dried cow or horse droppings burn slowly and surprisingly clean once moisture is gone. Farmers spread dung to dry in thin patties during summer, then stored it under eaves or lofts. This humble fuel gave off a steady glow and a faint, earthy aroma. For poor families, it meant the difference between a bitter freeze and a livable night. Managing fuel wasn't just about gathering, it demanded strategy. Families layered fuels: a base of peat for long-lasting heat, small wood for quick ignition, and dung to stretch supply. Fires burned low and slow, so embers stayed alive until morning. Sparks meant waste. So hearths were carefully banked with ash to trap coals like treasure under sand. Why does this matter for our journey? Because fuel shaped daily life and architecture. Homes centered around the hearth not only for cooking but for conserving every ounce of heat these fuels produced. The next chapter explores that heart of the house, the kitchen, where these fuels turn from raw material into steady warmth. Step inside a medieval home at midday and your eyes find the hearth first. It's more than a cooking space. It is the core of the household, the engine that kept life going through the long winter. Every design choice around this kitchen reflected a single goal: hold the heat. The hearth usually sat at the center of the main room, sometimes in a shallow pit lined with stone. Its location mattered. A central fire radiated warmth evenly, sending gentle waves to every corner of the house. Smoke rose through an opening in the roof or a small vent in the wall, but much of the heat stayed trapped below the rafters. Can you picture the ceiling darkened with soot, evidence of years of careful fire tending? Builders treated the hearth like a living machine. Wide stones at its base stored heat like the heavy iron plates of a modern wood stove. During the day, those stones soaked up energy. At night, they released a slow, steady warmth. Some homes used raised clay platforms to spread the fire's reach. In larger manor kitchens, great open hearths were big enough to roast entire animals, turning kitchens into glowing furnaces that also warmed adjoining rooms. Cooking and heating blended seamlessly. Iron pots and cauldrons hung on adjustable hooks, so cooks could shift them closer or farther from the flames, managing both meal and room temperature. Bread ovens built into the wall captured extra heat after the fire burned down, keeping the kitchen cozy for hours. Imagine baking bread not just for food, but as a way to fill the house with lingering heat and the smell of warm dough. The hearth also drove social life. Families gathered here to eat, talk, and mend clothing, their breath visible in the smoky air. Children played near the warm stones while adults shared stories and planned the next day's work. The kitchen was a circle of light against the long, dark winter. Why does this matter for what follows? Because the kitchen's heat flow shaped the entire house plan. Walls, floors, and sleeping spaces were arranged to capture and store that energy. Without this design, fuel would have been wasted and families left cold. In the next chapter, we'll step beyond the hearth to see how walls and materials locked in the warmth that kitchens produced. Stand close to a medieval cottage wall and you might feel its quiet strength. Those thick barriers did far more than keep out rain and wandering animals. They acted like giant batteries, storing heat from the hearth and releasing it slowly through the night. This clever use of thermal mass helped transform cold stone and mud into a steady source of comfort. Many village homes used wattle-and-daub construction, a woven lattice of wooden rods packed with clay, straw, and sometimes animal hair. When the clay dried, it formed a dense skin that blocked drafts and absorbed heat. Think of it as a natural thermos once warmed by the fire. The wall held warmth and bled it back into the room for hours. Where stone was plentiful, builders stacked thick limestone or granite blocks and sealed them with lime mortar. Heavy stone might seem icy, but its density worked like a heat sink. During the day, the hearth's energy soaked deep into the rock. As night fell, the stone released that stored warmth, keeping the interior noticeably warmer than the outside air. Ever leaned against a sun-warmed wall at dusk? Medieval families enjoyed the same effect, just powered by fire instead of sunlight. Plaster and whitewash added another insulating layer. Lime plaster filled hairline gaps, while a final wash reflected firelight and helped distribute gentle warmth. Some wealthier homes hung tapestries or reed mats on interior walls. These weren't just decoration, they trapped pockets of air, adding a thin but effective thermal buffer. Builders also paid attention to foundations. A slightly raised stone base kept the lower walls dry, reducing heat loss through damp earth. Floors of packed clay or stone slabs connected directly to those heavy walls, spreading stored heat beneath sleeping mats and benches. Can you imagine the comfort of a floor that stayed faintly warm while the wind howled outside? These construction choices weren't random. They represented generations of trial, error, and observation. Without modern science, builders learned that mass meant warmth, and that airtight seams kept precious heat from slipping away. Every layer, timber, clay, stone, plaster, served the single purpose of conserving energy from the hearth. Why does this matter for what comes next? Because a house's ability to hold heat depends on more than fuel or fire size. It relies on the silent partnership of walls and materials working through the night. Next, we'll see how medieval families controlled the invisible enemy of all heating drafts. Their strategies for stopping cold air completed the design that kept homes warm when winter tested every seam. Even the best hearth and heavy walls can't keep a home warm if cold air leaks through cracks. Medieval families understood this problem and developed simple but clever ways to stop drafts and control where heat traveled inside their houses. First came the doors. Thick oak planks were common, but the real secret lay in how they sealed the frame. Builders used overlapping boards and packed gaps with moss or wool. A snug door slowed the sneaky flow of winter air. Families also hung heavy curtains across doorways, creating a second barrier that acted like today's draft stoppers. Have you ever felt the sudden calm when a door curtain falls into place? It's like flipping a switch on the wind. Windows were small and often covered with oiled parchment or thin slices of horn instead of glass. These translucent covers blocked gusts while letting in muted light. In colder regions, shutters closed tight at dusk. Inside, another cloth curtain might hang across the opening to trap warmth. Layer by layer, people built defenses against the endless push of cold. Heat zoning was equally important. Medieval houses rarely tried to keep every space warm. Instead, families concentrated warmth in the main room and used side chambers for storage or sleeping only when needed. By focusing on a single heated core, they saved fuel and kept living areas cozy. Think of it as the ancestor of modern zone heating, where you warm the room you occupy and ignore the rest. Interior partitions played a quiet role. Simple wooden screens or half walls blocked drafts while guiding warm air to where people gathered. Heavy wool tapestries or reed mats lined cold outer walls, creating a soft surface that trapped tiny pockets of insulating air. Even a simple chest or stacked firewood against a wall could reduce heat loss. Daily routines supported these structural tricks. Before nightfall, someone checked every shutter and curtain. Any gap was stuffed with straw or rags. At bedtime, families drew interior curtains around sleeping areas, shrinking the warm zone to a snug cocoon. Doesn't that sound like the medieval version of today's heated blanket? Why does this matter for our next step? Because stopping drafts was the final guard around the heat that the hearth and thick walls created. Without these small but deliberate actions, even the best-built house would cool rapidly. Now that we've sealed the warmth inside, let's move to the heart of nightly life. The bedding and sleep routines that turned a tight, warm space into true comfort. Night fell early in medieval winters, and the real battle against the cold began after sunset. Without electric lights or central heating, families turned their beds into fortresses of warmth, using layers of fabric, smart design, and nightly rituals that turned the sleeping space into a private hearth. Beds often stood on wooden frames raised slightly from the floor. This gap kept bedding dry and away from cold ground moisture. On the frame lay a thick straw mattress, fresh straw stuffed into a sturdy tick and replaced as needed. Over this rested woolen blankets or heavy quilts. Wealthier households might add feather beds, but even the poorest families layered coarse wool and linen to trap body heat. Have you ever buried yourself under blankets on a winter night and felt the heat rise within minutes? That was the goal. Curtain beds were common, where resources allowed. 4 wooden posts held thick drapes of wool or heavy linen that could be drawn closed. Once the curtains fell, the small enclosed space warmed quickly from human body heat. It worked much like a modern sleeping bag, creating a microclimate far warmer than the room around it. Inside, breath condensed on the cloth walls, leaving a faint frost by morning. Shared sleeping added more warmth. Families often slept together, parents, children, sometimes even grandparents, in a single bed or on adjoining pallets. Close contact conserved heat and built security. In some regions, small livestock like goats or chickens stayed indoors overnight, their body warmth adding to the collective microclimate. The steady breathing of animals and people alike turned the sleeping area into a living furnace. Before retiring, families followed a careful routine. The fire was banked with ash to keep embers glowing until morning. Doors and shutters were checked one last time for leaks. Someone might hang an extra cloth over the main door or window, a final defense against the night air. Candles were snuffed to reduce smoke and preserve oxygen, leaving only the faint glow of the hearth. Sleep itself often followed a biphasic pattern, two shorter segments with a period of wakefulness in between. During that quiet hour, people might pray, tell stories, or check the fire before returning to bed. This natural rhythm allowed them to maintain the hearth and ensure the room stayed warm. Why does this matter for our next chapter? Because staying warm was not just about structures and fuels. It was about nightly habits and family cooperation. The bed became the final barrier between the human body and the freezing dark. With bedding secure, our journey now turns to clothing and sleep patterns, the garments and daily choices that helped medieval families face the cold even before they lay down. Warm beds helped, but medieval people still faced icy air when they stirred in the night. Clothing was the first line of defense day and night, and their sleep habits were shaped around staying warm with limited fuel. Wool reigned supreme. From coarse peasant tunics to fine noble cloaks, wool trapped air and held body heat even when damp. Undergarments of linen wicked away moisture, keeping skin dry. At bedtime, many slept in their day shirts or wore long wool night tunics. Children sometimes layered 2 or 3 garments, turning sleepwear into a second blanket. Have you ever fallen asleep in a favorite hoodie on a cold evening? That familiar comfort echoes a medieval habit. Head coverings were essential. Nightcaps of wool or linen kept precious heat from escaping through the scalp. Simple stockings or foot wraps protected toes from the chill of earthen floors. Wealthier families added fur-lined slippers or soft leather socks. Each piece formed part of a flexible system, easy to shed when fires burned high, easy to add when winds howled. Daily rhythms also conserved warmth. Many households followed a biphasic sleep pattern, drifting off soon after dusk, waking for an hour around midnight, then sleeping again until dawn. During that midnight watch, someone tended the embers and checked doors, ensuring the hearth never died. A quiet conversation, a prayer, or a small meal often filled the wakeful hour. Doesn't that sound like an ancient version of the midnight snack? Layering and routine worked together. People rose with the sun's first hint, when the room still held some warmth from the hearth. Dressing quickly and staying close to the kitchen fire reduced the shock of cold mornings. Children were wrapped in woolen shawls while adults stirred coals and prepared breakfast. The clothing itself told stories of class and trade. Wealthy households could afford dyed wool or imported furs from the Baltic, while peasants relied on homespun grays and browns. Yet the basic principle, trap heat, stay dry, united everyone from manor to cottage. Why does this matter for what comes next? Clothing and sleep patterns reveal how people extended the heat gain from hearth and walls, making sure their bodies retained every degree possible. With garments layered and sleep timed to the fire's rhythm, they turned long winter nights into manageable routines. Now we move from personal habits to household management, daily fuel budgeting that kept these systems running through the harshest months. Warmth in a medieval home depended not only on gathering fuel, but on stretching it through the entire winter. Every household treated wood, peat, and dung like treasure. Careful planning meant the difference between a cozy spring and a desperate frozen March. Families began preparing months in advance. In summer, they cut peat bricks, collected fallen branches, and shaped dung patties for drying. By autumn, stacks of fuel rose like small walls outside cottages or inside covered sheds. Each pile represented calculated survival. Can you imagine watching those stacks shrink day by day as snow kept falling? Budgeting started with rationing. The morning fire was lit small, often with a handful of kindling and a single peat brick. Cooking doubled as heating, so meals were timed to maximize warmth. A family might boil porridge at dawn, then bank the fire under ash to hold a slow glow until evening. Waste was unthinkable. A stray spark that consumed extra wood was a quiet disaster. People recorded fuel use in memory and habit rather than on paper. A mother might know that 6 peat bricks warmed the home for a full day if the weather stayed calm, but 8 or 9 were needed when icy winds howled. Children helped gather small twigs for kindling, learning to read the sky and guess the day's needs. This constant mental arithmetic turned every family member into a fuel accountant. Heat zones discussed earlier were critical to this plan. Only the main room received consistent warmth. Side chambers stayed closed off, unless absolutely necessary. Sleeping areas were curtained to trap body heat, letting the hearth burn lower without losing comfort. Layered clothing reduced reliance on roaring fires. Do you ever lower the thermostat at night to save on bills? Medieval budgeting worked on the same principle. Unexpected cold snaps tested discipline. Extra fuel might be pulled from reserve piles meant for late winter, but that choice carried risk. Run out too soon and the family faced brutal nights with nothing but thin blankets and shared body heat. Stories tell of neighbors lending peat or wood in emergencies, a reminder that survival was a community effort. This attention to every ember highlights a key truth. Warmth was never taken for granted. Fuel budgeting shaped daily schedules, from early gathering trips to nightly banking of the hearth. It tied people to the rhythms of the land and the unpredictable moods of winter. With the household's resources balanced and every brick of peat accounted for, the stage is set for a final perspective. How these hard-won lessons echo in today's sustainable building practices. Next, we'll explore the modern parallels and enduring wisdom that medieval fuel budgeting leaves behind. Look closely at a well-built medieval home, and you'll see ideas that feel surprisingly modern. Without knowing the science, medieval builders practice principles that today's architects call passive heating. Their methods still inspire energy-efficient design and sustainable living. The first lesson is thermal mass. Thick stone or packed earth walls absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly through the night. Modern passive houses use concrete or dense brick for the same reason. When you lean against a sun-warmed wall in the evening, you experience the same gentle heat that once radiated from medieval cottages after the hearth burned low. Orientation mattered too. Many houses face south when possible, capturing maximum winter sunlight. Windows remained small to reduce heat loss, but their placement allowed daylight to warm interiors naturally. Modern architects study sun angles and glazing for identical goals. Doesn't it feel remarkable that villagers without blueprints understood solar gain centuries ago? Airflow control offers another parallel. Draft-stopping curtains, interior partitions, and tight shutters performed like today's weather stripping and zone heating. Families heated the main living space and allowed other rooms to stay cooler. A practice now echoed in smart thermostat zoning to conserve energy. Fuel economy taught yet another enduring principle: efficiency over abundance. Medieval households burned wood, peat, or dung, slowly and steadily, banking embers beneath ash to stretch every spark. Modern pellet stoves and high-efficiency furnaces aim for the same long, controlled burn. The technology differs, but the logic is the same: maximize heat, minimize waste. Clothing and bedding complete the lesson. Layered wool garments and curtained beds created microclimates that reduced the need for larger fires. Today we talk about personal thermal management, but the medieval approach was equally personal and just as effective. Why does this matter now? Because climate concerns push us to cut energy use and rethink heating. Medieval homes show that comfort does not require constant fuel or complex machines. Their design proves that careful orientation, heavy walls, and smart air control can maintain warmth with minimal input. As you reflect on their ingenuity, consider this final thought. These people survived brutal winters using principles that modern science now validates. Their quiet wisdom reminds us that sustainability isn't new, it's a rediscovery. In our closing chapter, we'll draw together every insight from hearth to curtain to reveal how a medieval home remained a warm refuge when the world outside froze. Step back and look at the whole picture. Fuel, kitchens, walls, curtains, bedding, clothing, and strict routines. Each element formed one link in a chain of survival. Alone, none of these tricks could hold off a medieval winter. Together, they made homes livable, sometimes even comfortable through months of snow and ice. Consider the daily rhythm. Morning began with banking embers and rationing fuel. Daylight warmed walls and floors, while families worked near the hearth. At dusk, shutters closed and curtains dropped, shrinking the warm zone to a single glowing heart of the house. Finally, night fell into layers of wool, curtained beds, and shared warmth. Doesn't that rhythm feel almost like a carefully tuned engine running on human habit and natural cycles? The architecture reinforced that cycle. Low ceilings, compact rooms, and thick walls stored and held precious heat. Even tapestries and wall hangings pulled double-duty decorative by day, insulating by night. People didn't waste effort heating unused spaces. They thought like modern energy planners, focusing every ember on the rooms that mattered most. Social life also revolved around warmth. Families and neighbors gathered together in kitchens or great halls, pooling both body heat and companionship. A crowded room wasn't just lively, it was warmer. The line between survival and comfort blurred when community itself became part of the heating system. From the outside, these homes looked simple, even crude. But inside, every design choice carried generations of tested knowledge. Peasants didn't have scientific vocabulary for thermal mass or airflow management, yet their daily experience taught the same lessons. Trial and error became tradition, and tradition built houses that stood against the cold. Why does this matter for us today? Because these solutions remind us that comfort is not only about technology, it's about design that works with nature, not against it. Medieval homes didn't rely on endless fuel. They relied on clever building and disciplined routines. That balance is exactly what our own age needs to remember. We've now closed the loop on our exploration. From fuel sources to passive heating lessons, you've seen how each detail connected. And yet, one question remains hanging. What happened when homes weren't enough? When sieges, wars, or disasters stripped away these comforts, survival demanded new strategies. That's where our journey continues beyond the warmth of the cottage, into the harsher realities of medieval life, where even these lessons sometimes failed. Would you like me to keep building Chapter 11 forward into the castles, life, construction, defenses cluster you mapped earlier? Or should I complete the remaining chapters strictly within the home heating angle until we reach the full 20? Castles stood like giant stone guardians over the landscape. But inside, keeping warm after sunset was just as serious as defending the walls. A castle night was a careful dance of patrols, glowing embers, and clever design meant to protect both people and precious heat. After the heavy gates closed at dusk, the great hall became the castle's heart. Fires burned in massive hearths, their smoke venting through high chimneys or open louvres in the roof. Servants stoked the flames with oak and beech logs cut from nearby forests. Stone walls held the day's heat, slowly radiating it back into the bustling hall. Can you imagine the echo of footsteps on flagstones warmed by the fire's steady breath? Guards paced the battlements and inner courtyards, their torches flickering against cold stone. They checked doors, shutters, and tapestries that lined interior corridors. Heavy curtains weren't decoration alone. They kept drafts from creeping through long, chilly hallways. Even in a fortress, stopping drafts meant the difference between comfort and a bitter night. Living quarters were clustered around central fireplaces or braziers. Nobles slept in chambers where thick tapestries draped the walls and heavy curtains surrounded beds, creating private pockets of warmth. Servants often slept in shared quarters closer to the kitchens, where the heat of daytime cooking lingered well into the night. Layers of woolen blankets and fur-lined robes added insulation, turning personal clothing into an extension of the castle's heating plan. The castle's design aided the night watch. Narrow stairwells and heavy wooden doors limited airflow, keeping heat where it was needed and allowing guards to patrol without losing warmth. Braziers placed strategically along key corridors acted like small beacons of heat, guiding night patrols and giving momentary relief from the cold. Why does this matter to our larger story? Because even mighty castles face the same challenge as simple cottages: hold the heat, fight the drafts, and make the night survivable. The methods, grand hearths, thick stone, layered textiles were more elaborate but shared the same principles as village homes. Next, we'll descend from these fortified halls to explore how castle kitchens managed food and fuel to feed hundreds of people while keeping the fortress warm. When a castle faced siege, warmth and food meant survival as much as strong walls. Behind the gates, Every ember of heat and every grain of wheat was counted with military precision. The great kitchens and storerooms became the hidden engines of endurance. A well-planned castle stored months of provisions. Grain, salted meat, dried fish, and barrels of ale filled cool cellars and vaulted storerooms. Thick stone walls kept temperatures stable, slowing spoilage much like a natural refrigerator. Guards checked these supplies daily, knowing a single damp corner could ruin sacks of flour or invite rats. Can you imagine the tension as each day's rations shrank while the enemy waited outside? Firewood or charcoal was stacked in guarded piles, equally precious. Kitchens needed steady heat not only for cooking but to keep interior rooms above freezing. Cooks balanced the fire carefully. Too hot and they wasted fuel. Too low and food cooked poorly or smoke filled the hall. Large hearths doubled as heat sources for nearby sleeping quarters, proving again that food and warmth were inseparable. Water supply was critical. Many castles relied on deep wells or cisterns within the walls. During winter sieges, melting snow supplemented these sources, but each bucket was a reminder that water could run out. Smoke from constant fires had to be vented without losing heat, so chimneys and flues were inspected constantly. A quiet battle against both cold and suffocation. Rationing required strict discipline. Nobles and soldiers received measured portions of bread, cheese, and thin stew, while servants often ate even less. Records from medieval garrisons describe exact daily allowances, sometimes a single loaf and a pint of ale per person. Kitchen staff stretched meals with barley or peas, creating hearty potages that simmered for hours on minimal fuel. The smell of slow-cooked grain and vegetables must have been both comforting and cruel when portions were small. Fuel decisions shaped daily life. Fires burned low overnight to conserve wood, and rooms beyond the kitchen were closed to retain warmth. Families huddled near the great hall hearths, while guards rotated through cold watch posts. The entire community moved in rhythm with the kitchen's heat and the ration bell's call. Why does this matter in our wider exploration of warmth? Because during a siege, the ability to feed and heat hundreds inside thick stone walls proved that medieval engineering was as much about logistics as fortification. The next chapter will look at another hidden element of castle survival, how builders and residents managed smoke and fire danger while keeping these vital hearths alive. Inside a stone fortress, fire was both friend and constant threat. The same flames that warmed rooms and cooked meals could destroy a castle if sparks escaped control. Medieval builders and residents developed careful systems to fight smoke and fire while preserving the heat that life depended on. Great halls and kitchens burned huge logs day and night. To guide smoke away without losing too much warmth, architects built tall chimneys and roof vents called louves. These openings could be adjusted with wooden shutters or iron plates, letting just enough air flow to carry smoke upward. Stand under one of these vents and you'd see the sky through a haze. A reminder of how critical airflow was for safety. Workers inspected chimneys daily. Creosote buildup threatened sudden flare-ups, so flues were scraped and soot removed with long brushes or bundles of thorny twigs. Fires were banked at night to keep embers alive but reduce sparks. Even a single wandering ember on a tapestry could mean disaster. Can you picture a sleepy guard watching a tiny flame climb a wall hanging before rushing to douse it? Water storage was a top priority. Cisterns and rain-fed barrels dotted courtyards, and wells often sat within the inner ward. Buckets hung ready on hooks near kitchens and great halls. In some castles, wooden pipes or stone channels carried water to key areas, forming primitive sprinkler networks. Drills were rare, but servants and soldiers knew their roles when smoke rose. Form a chain, pass buckets, and protect the Great Hall first. Firefighting also meant smart building. Stone-vaulted ceilings in kitchens contained sparks, while thick doors and narrow corridors limited oxygen flow. Braziers for guards and servants were often placed in alcoves or set on stone platforms to reduce risk. Even furniture placement mattered. Tables and benches stayed a safe distance from the hearth. Smoke itself was an invisible challenge. Too much ventilation cooled the castle. Too little filled rooms with choking fumes. Louvre balanced this delicate trade, and cooks mastered the art of tending low, hot fires that produced steady heat without clouds of soot. Guests in the Great Hall might not see the constant small adjustments that kept the air breathable. Why does this matter for our larger story of warmth? Because controlling fire and smoke allowed castles to harness heat without inviting catastrophe. The next chapter follows a less obvious but equally vital system: how even the latrines of a fortress used airflow and design to maintain hygiene and manage temperature. In a medieval castle, even the latrines called garde-robes played a role in warmth and survival. These private spaces doubled as clever ventilation systems, moving foul air and, surprisingly, helping manage indoor temperature. Garde-robes were often built as small stone rooms projecting from outer walls, sometimes over a moat or deep pit. A vertical shaft carried waste downward while allowing air to rise. This design worked like a natural chimney. Warm air from inside the castle pulled cooler air upward through the shaft, carrying odors away. Can you imagine stepping inside and feeling a faint upward draft, proof of quiet engineering at work? Stone seats with round openings were common, though wealthier castles added wooden covers or cushioned benches. To reduce smells and disease, lime or ash was poured into the pit below. Rainwater channels sometimes flushed waste, especially in castles with access to a flowing moat or river. These features not only improved hygiene, but also reduced the need for dangerous indoor chamber pots. The airflow served more than sanitation. By drawing air from living quarters toward the shaft, garde-robes helped regulate circulation through the castle. In winter, this constant upward movement subtly removed dampness and balanced the temperature of interior rooms. It was an early form of passive ventilation, unnoticed but essential. Servants maintained these spaces with routine care. Pits were emptied periodically, and walls were scrubbed with lime wash to kill germs. Though the work was unpleasant, it kept disease at bay and prevented the buildup of dangerous gases. Imagine the discipline required to manage such chores in the heart of winter. Privacy varied. Some garde-robes had small doors and even narrow windows, while others opened directly from sleeping chambers. Nobles might enjoy a personal facility near their bedchamber. Servants often shared communal shafts accessible from corridors. Regardless of status, everyone relied on the same airflow principles to keep living areas tolerable. Why does this matter in our larger exploration of warmth? Because even sanitation influenced a castle's ability to stay healthy and comfortable during long winters or sieges. Efficient waste management and natural ventilation kept interior air fresher and reduced damp chills that could sap body heat. With the castle's hidden airflow system uncovered, we move next to the rugged frontiers border castles that stood as survival outposts. There, keeping warm and supplied became an even harsher challenge. Far from the bustling centers of power, border castles stood as lonely sentinels. Perched on wind-swept hills or guarding mountain passes, these fortresses faced brutal winters with fewer supplies and greater danger. Life here demanded toughness and inventive ways to keep warm and alive. Builders placed these castles where natural defenses were strongest: rocky cliffs, narrow valleys, or river crossings. The same strategic sites often brought fierce winds and icy storms. Thick stone walls and small windows were essential, but isolation made fuel and food harder to secure. Can you picture soldiers watching snow swirl across endless forests, knowing relief might be weeks away? Supply lines were lifelines. In good weather, carts brought wood, grain, and salted meat from distant villages. When winter storms or enemy patrols cut these routes, the garrison survived on stockpiled grain, dried peas, and smoked fish. Fuel stores were guarded like treasure, with careful rationing to ensure fires burned all season. Heat sources were concentrated. The Great Hall served as the communal living space, with a central hearth burning almost constantly. Guards and soldiers slept in chambers clustered around kitchens or bakehouses, using shared warmth to stretch supplies. Outlying towers or gatehouses received only small braziers, forcing rotating watch shifts to keep men from freezing. Water presented its own trials. Wells sometimes froze, and melting snow was risky if siege conditions forced secrecy. Rainwater cisterns lined with lead or stone helped, but each bucket required effort in the biting cold. Fires for cooking and minimal washing had to balance the need for warmth and the need to conserve fuel. Isolation also shaped morale. Stories of camaraderie and music by the hearth reveal how soldiers fought the mental chill of endless nights. A lively hall filled with song and shared ale helped keep spirits high while winds howled outside the battlements. These outposts weren't just military points, they were survival labs. Every architectural decision, from narrow stairwells that trapped heat to thick doors that blocked drafts, came from experience in harsh climates. The lessons learned here later influenced more comfortable estates and manors inland. Why does this matter in our broader journey? Border castles show medieval heating and survival at their toughest. They prove that even in the most exposed places, careful planning of supplies, fire, and architecture allowed people to endure winters that could otherwise be deadly. Next, we'll step into the quieter glow of castle interiors after dark, exploring how lighting worked without fireplaces and how candles and rushlights added both heat and atmosphere. When night fell over a medieval castle, darkness arrived fast and deep. Without electric lights, keeping interior spaces bright and safe required planning as clever as any military defense. Lighting also added a small but valuable measure of warmth, turning every candle into both flame and heater. Candles were the mainstay. Wealthy halls burned beeswax candles that gave a clean, bright flame and a sweet scent. Most households relied on cheaper tallow candles made from animal fat. Though they smoked and smelled faintly of livestock, tallow candles provided steady light and a hint of extra heat. Have you ever warmed your hands near a cluster of candles and felt the air shift? Multiply that by dozens and you have a medieval evening glow. Rushlights offered another option. These were strips of dried rush plants soaked in animal fat, then set upright in simple holders. They burned with a long, narrow flame, perfect for lighting corridors or small chambers. Some castles used rows of rushlights to guide night patrols along inner walls, like primitive runway lights. Oil lamps, though less common, added variety. Simple clay bowls with wicks fed by fish or vegetable oil flickered in kitchens and storerooms. Each tiny lamp contributed both light and a whisper of warmth. In great halls, chandeliers or iron candelabra held dozens of candles high overhead, casting dancing shadows on tapestries and stone. Lighting design balanced safety with heat retention. Fires in large hearths provided a warm central glow, while candles and rushlights filled corners where smoke from a big fire might linger. Narrow stairways and passageways featured wall-mounted holders, carefully spaced to keep flames away from fabrics or wooden beams. Guards and servants kept a constant watch to prevent accidental fires. Light shaped daily rhythm. Evening meals often began just after dusk, with long tables illuminated by candelabra and wall sconces. After supper, families or soldiers gathered around the main hearth while servants snuffed unneeded flames to conserve tallow. The soft, golden light made rooms feel warmer than they actually were, a psychological comfort on cold nights. Why does this matter in our story of warmth? Because lighting wasn't just about seeing, it contributed to heat and mood. Each flame added a little warmth. Each fixture helped control airflow and reduce drafts. Together, they created an environment that felt alive even during the harshest winter evenings. With illumination mastered, our exploration turns next to the builders themselves. How did medieval craftsmen solve the unique winter problems of construction and maintenance, ensuring that these castles remained secure and warm for generations? Keeping a castle or village standing through winter wasn't just about living inside it, it was about building and repairing structures despite freezing weather. Medieval builders faced icy winds, frozen ground, and limited daylight, yet they developed inventive solutions to keep projects moving and homes warm. Mortar was a constant challenge. Lime-based mixes could freeze before setting, so masons timed work carefully. They mixed smaller batches and added warm water carried from hearth fires to keep the mortar pliable. Some even built temporary shelters of wood and canvas around sections of wall, creating a windbreak that held enough warmth for curing. Imagine the sight of flickering braziers under a canvas tent as workers laid stone in the dead of winter. Scaffolding had to survive heavy snow. Carpenters lashed sturdy timber frames with rope and peg joints tight, knowing that ice could swell and loosen wood. They checked lashings daily and carved drainage grooves so melting snow wouldn't rot the planks. A single failed joint could send men and materials crashing down a risk everyone understood. Tools demanded constant care. Iron chisels grew brittle in extreme cold, so blacksmiths reheated and quenched them in controlled cycles to maintain strength. Wooden handles shrank or swelled depending on humidity, forcing workers to adjust fittings before each day's labor. Have you ever tried hammering nails with numb fingers? Builders worked through that challenge for hours. Transporting materials required equal ingenuity. Frozen rivers sometimes became temporary roads for sledges carrying heavy stone, while snow-packed paths allowed oxen to pull loads more easily than muddy summer tracks. These seasonal shortcuts turned harsh winter landscapes into unexpected allies. Safety planning mirrored modern job sites. Builders rotated crews to warm by the fire, used layered wool clothing, and wore simple leather mitts to protect hands from frostbite. Work started late and ended early to fit the brief winter light. Yet progress continued because castles had to be ready for spring campaigning or unexpected attack. Why does this matter to our journey of warmth? Because every comfortable medieval home or castle depended on builders who understood winter as both obstacle and resource. Their methods, heated mortar water, snow roads, insulated scaffolds, show how survival began long before families gathered around a hearth. Next, we'll see how these same builders made critical decisions when choosing the stone itself, selecting materials that could resist frost and keep interiors warm for centuries. A castle's strength began with its stones. Medieval builders chose materials not just for beauty or availability, but for their ability to survive harsh winters. Each block had to endure freezing temperatures, driving snow, and the constant cycle of thaw and refreeze that could split weaker rock apart. Limestone was a favorite where quarries allowed. It was abundant, easy to shape when freshly cut, and hardened as it aged. Dense limestone resisted water penetration, reducing the risk of frost cracking. Builders selected blocks with tight grain and few natural seams, knowing that water inside a stone could expand into destructive ice. Can you picture a mason tapping each block with a hammer, listening for the clear ring that meant strength? Granite offered even greater durability. Its hard, crystalline structure made it nearly immune to frost, though its weight and difficulty to carve slowed construction. Where quarries lay nearby, like in Scotland or Brittany, granite gave castles walls that still stand centuries later. Transporting such heavy stone over winter roads often required sledges on frozen rivers, turning icy conditions into an advantage. Sandstone varied widely. Fine-grained varieties performed well if properly dressed and sealed with lime mortar, but softer sandstone could crumble under winter stress. Builders inspected color and texture carefully, rejecting stones with visible layering that might peel away after repeated freezes. Mortar choice also mattered. Lime mortar allowed slight movement and breathing, letting moisture escape before it could freeze. To test stone, masons sometimes left sample blocks exposed through a winter before using them. A cracked or spalled piece was discarded. Quarry workers learned which layers of a cliff yielded the toughest material, passing down that knowledge through generations. Foundations demanded special care. Builders laid large, well-fitted stones below the frost line to prevent shifting. Drainage channels diverted meltwater away from walls, protecting both stone and mortar. A single poorly drained corner could threaten an entire structure, so trenches and gutters were as vital as the stones themselves. These choices weren't about luxury. They were survival decisions. A wall that failed in winter invited collapse, enemy breach, or deadly drafts. By selecting and placing stone wisely, medieval builders created fortresses and homes that kept interiors dry and warm for centuries. Why does this matter in our broader story? Because warmth isn't just about fires and blankets, it begins with the very bones of a building. The right stone meant steady indoor temperatures, and a castle that outlasted storms and sieges alike. With materials chosen and walls secure, our journey now turns to the quiet protectors of the night. Next, we explore how medieval guards and household members managed security after dark, while keeping their own bodies warm. When darkness fell on a medieval home or castle, keeping warm and staying safe blended into a single nightly routine. Guards, servants, and families all played a role in ensuring that the hearth's heat and the household security lasted until morning. In small village homes, doors were barred with heavy wooden beams fitted into sturdy brackets.
Simple iron latches or wooden pins locked shutters tight. Before bed, someone checked every seam for drafts and every entry for danger. Curtains dropped across doorways, sealing both warmth and safety.
Can you imagine the quiet moment when the final bar slid into place and the family exhaled in relief? Castles practiced a more complex ritual. As the great gates closed at dusk, the night watch began. Guards patrolled walls and towers, carrying torches that lit narrow walkways and added small bursts of warmth against the icy air. Inside, servants banked fires and hung heavy drapes across corridor doors to trap heat and reduce airflow, another layer of protection for sleeping nobles and soldiers. Sleeping patterns reflected these security needs. In many households, someone stayed lightly awake during the night's first or second watch. Families followed a biphasic rhythm, sleeping for several hours, waking briefly around midnight to tend embers, check latches, or simply share quiet conversation. This natural break ensured that fires never died and the doors stayed firmly secured. Interior arrangements also served both warmth and safety. Families slept together in the main heated room, pooling body heat and making it easier to respond if trouble came. In castles, guards rotated through warm guard rooms near the Great Hall, stepping outside for brief, cold patrols before returning to a brazier's glow. Even animals contributed to security and warmth. Dogs lay near doors, alert to intruders and adding their own body heat to the household. Their sudden bark could wake an entire family faster than any bell. These nightly habits reveal a deep understanding of human and structural needs. Warmth kept people alive, but vigilance kept them safe. The same heavy curtains that stopped drafts muffled sound, so families relied on keen ears and trusted routines to catch any disturbance. Why does this matter in our larger story? Because the medieval night was more than a stretch of darkness, it was a carefully managed operation. Heat, security, and human rhythm worked together like gears in a clock, ensuring that morning would arrive with the household intact. With the night secure and the hearth still glowing, we reach the final chapter of our journey, drawing together all these lessons to see how medieval wisdom about warmth and resilience continues to resonate today. Our journey through medieval winters ends where it began, with the simple human need for warmth. After exploring fires, walls, bedding, and night watch routines, one truth stands clear. Survival relied on design and discipline, not endless fuel. Each element of medieval life worked in concert. Builders chose dense stone and wattle and daub walls that stored heat like silent batteries. Families layered wool and linen, sealed shutters, and shared beds to trap every degree. Kitchens doubled as engines of warmth, and nightly fuel budgeting stretched supplies through the darkest months. Can you imagine the quiet pride of a household that reached spring with fuel still stacked by the door? Community amplified these efforts. Villagers helped one another cut peat, repair roofs, and share embers during unexpected freezes. In castles, guards and servants coordinated fires, lighting, and patrols so that nobles and soldiers alike stayed safe and warm. Warmth was never private, it was a collective achievement. The wisdom extends beyond history. Modern architects praise passive heating, but medieval builders practiced it instinctively. Thermal mass, strategic orientation, and controlled airflow made their homes both efficient and resilient. Their methods remind us that sustainable living is not a new invention but an old mastery. Daily rituals completed the design. From the evening check of shutters to the midnight tending of embers, every action protected heat and life. Even entertainment songs by the hearth or shared midnight prayers help conserve energy by keeping families close to a single warm core. Why does this matter now? Because the same forces challenge us today. Rising energy costs, harsh winters, and the need to live within nature's limits. Medieval households show that careful planning and simple shared habits can create comfort without excess. Picture the final scene. Dawn breaking over a frost-coated landscape, smoke curling from a single chimney. Inside, the hearth glows. Walls radiate stored warmth, and a family stirs beneath layers of wool. They are safe, Because every stone, curtain, and routine has played its part. These lessons endure. They tell us that warmth is not merely a product of technology, but of intention, an art of living with the environment rather than against it. The medieval home, far from a cold relic, remains a quiet teacher for our own future.